Hello, my sweet, beautiful friends. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in June and July. My name is Katya, if you've not been here before. I didn't set a TBR for June, so I just did lots of mood reading that month, but I did set a TBR for July, and I'm very happy to report that there's only one book from that TBR that I didn't quite get to. I read every single book that I was planning to, except for Sword of Kaigen. Unfortunately, I had to return it to the library because my hold ran out, but I have since placed another hold so that I can hopefully try to read it again in the future. I'm going to be reviewing these books that we're going to talk about today in pro-con lists, as always, because that is my favorite way to review books. Really helps keep me accountable so that I'm talking both about the things that I dislike and the things that I like, because even if I hate a book, there's always going to be some redeeming quality, some positive to it, and as much as I love a book, there will definitely always be at least some small negative, and hopefully by talking about both of those things, that'll give you a good idea of if our tastes align and if you are interested in picking up these books or deterred from picking up any of these books. I'm going to start with a DNF and then move into my lowest rated and then finish off with my highest rated. Some of my favorite books that I've read all year, I read in the past few months. So let's get right on into it. My one DNF that I unfortunately have to talk about is First Time Caller by B.K. Boris. I had very, very high expectations for this book, and I think the high expectations are what really damaged this reading experience for me. This book follows Lucy and Aiden. Lucy is a mechanic and a single mother, and Aiden works at a radio show where he gives people dating advice. One day, Lucy's daughter calls in to Aiden's show looking for advice for her mom because she thinks that her mom needs to find love. Lucy ends up getting on the phone with Aiden when she discovers that her daughter has called in to a radio show, and Lucy and Aiden have a very sweet, very uplifting conversation about what Lucy is looking for in a relationship, and their conversation ends up being so entertaining that their audience grows, and it's the most successful that Aiden's radio show has been in months, years, and long story short, he ends up asking Lucy to start a series on this radio show where he will help her date and find love. I first became interested in this book because it was compared so often to Sleepless in Seattle. They have very similar setups for their plots, and I love Sleepless in Seattle. It's one of my favorite rom-coms, one of my favorite movies, period. It's in my Letterboxd top 4. But as I was reading this book, I kept finding myself becoming really bored and really uninvested, and I kept thinking to myself, what if I just watched Sleepless in Seattle instead of forcing myself to read this comedy that's loosely based on a movie that I love so much? Why don't I just watch the movie? Because as much as there were some cute moments between Aiden and Lucy, between Lucy and her daughter, they did pale in comparison to the comedic skill and writing talent of Nora Ephron. And that's a very high bar to surpass. I'm not saying that this author had to have the same kind of style and skill of Nora Ephron, but I am saying that it felt like something was missing for me, and I just could not feel invested in the story, unfortunately. I definitely would consider returning to this series in the future to read about some of those side characters and their stories, but this one in particular I felt very meh about, and for that reason I decided it probably was not worth my time. Okay, sorry, I'm texting Chloe about Big Brother, but I'm locking back in to talk about the next book that I read, my next lowest rated, rather. I guess I don't really rate DNFs until I get really far in the book. I think I DNF'd First Time Caller at 40%. This next book though, unfortunately, I did read the whole thing, and I think it was not a fun reading experience. I actually vlogged this reading experience, and Chloe and I, speaking of her, are going to be talking about it on the podcast soon because we read it together. But this is When the Moon Hatched. I give this one sad, dim star. This book follows our main character, Rave. She is an assassin for a rebel group. Pretty early in the book, she ends up imprisoned, and while she is in prison awaiting her grisly demise, she meets this man named Khan. Now, Khan is somebody that she doesn't know, but he seems to know her, and from there we have what should be an exciting, intricate plot following these two characters getting to know each other, going on adventures, finding dragons and other magical creatures, unraveling secrets and mysteries about their pasts and about the world. Unfortunately, that is not what I got. The plot was so meandering to the point that it was actually deeply confusing. Rave as a character is kind of a knockoff Selena Sardouthian, except 10 times as annoying. And I'm not like a huge Selena Sardathian fan, but I hated Rave. I hated the way that she spoke about herself and that she spoke about the world. She had this very like, I am so tough kind of attitude that just kind of grates on my nerves. The rhythm of the writing was so awkward that it kept taking me out of the story and making me distracted, because sometimes she would go on for paragraphs in this really overly metaphorical, teetering on obnoxious kind of loquacious writing style. And especially when our main character was trying to make a joke, she would indent and like say a quippy line as though it was a mic drop moment, like, okay, here's the punchline, and that bothered me because I was never laughing. This book also starts with like a 20 or 30 page glossary. It explains these different terms that are going to be used in the fantasy world and explaining all the different creatures. A lot of the creatures that were discussed in the glossary basically never come up or are never important to the story, and I don't know why they couldn't have just introduced those characters, those creatures, when they actually came up instead of in the front of the book in a glossary. Also, some of the fantasy terms like spelling day, D-A-E, or spelling grandpa with an H at the end for no reason. I didn't really need that in a glossary. I appreciate when an author respects my intelligence enough to think that I will know what a grandpa with an H is as opposed to a grandpa without an H. There were also lots of different characters and different perspectives. It's Rave for at least the first third, I want to say, and then we start hearing from these other perspectives, but their voices are indistinguishable from Rave's, so it was often very disorienting to know who was speaking or what was happening. I really hated this, I think especially because I had high hopes because the cover is so whimsical and lovely. I expected good things from it, but that just goes to show that you should not be judging a book by its cover, because I did, and I was really let down. There are dragons in this book, but they don't get as much screen time as maybe I would have been led to believe based on the fact that there was a dragon on the cover. Positive things about this book. Positive things. This feels so mean. Okay, I think if I understood the world better, it would be a very interesting world. I think while I was reading the book, the things that intrigued me the most were the setup of the kingdoms and the different creatures that exist within them. I was definitely interested by the different kinds of dragons and different magical creatures, and definitely wanted to learn more about them. Okay, my next lowest rated was The Love of My Afterlife. I gave this 2.5 stars. I actually read this for Summerween, so I have a vlog about this book as well. This book follows our main character, Delphi, who at the beginning of the book chokes to death, unfortunately. She's eating a microwave meal all by herself in her apartment. She chokes, she dies, she ends up in the afterlife waiting room, and in this afterlife waiting room she meets a man, a very beautiful man, and she knows as soon as they lock eyes and they start talking that this was the love of her life, and that like this was a guy that she was supposed to have met on Earth. Now the secretary of the afterlife waiting room now comes up to the two of them, sees them chatting and talking, and realizes that the man, his name is Jonah, is not supposed to be there. He was not supposed to die. So she sends him back down to Earth, and Delphi says, oh no, like I don't want to die. I want to go down to Earth and meet the love of my life, the love of my normal life, not the love of my afterlife. And the secretary makes a deal with her that if she can get the guy to kiss her in 10 days, then she can stay alive instead of passing away. So Delphi goes back down to Earth. She has 10 days to get this guy to kiss her. The trick now is that he has no memory of their interaction, and she just has to rely on her cosmic love at first sight connection with him. Delphi enlists the help of some of her neighbors, including a very grumpy man who she has butted heads with in the past. I think the thing that didn't work about this book for me is that it is very quirky, very lighthearted, very silly, very slapstick, to the point that Delphi could often be quite annoying to me. It was definitely a quick read and a fun time. I liked the romance at the center of the story. The way that Delphi slowly made more and more and deeper connections with the people around her in her quest for love was actually quite heartwarming. But this like tone of book is just really not my thing. I found myself, like I said, like quite annoyed by Delphi pretty often. So this was just a 2.5 for me, but that wouldn't preclude me from recommending it to other people because I'm sure lots of people would enjoy it more than I did. Another romance I read, The Next Best Fling. This got 3 stars, and part of that is because I just don't remember it very well. I think I gave it 3.5 when I first finished it, but the story has just not stuck with me at all. We follow our main character, Marcella. She is a public librarian and she is in love with her best friend. She and her best friend met in undergrad. They dated very, very briefly until he ended up breaking things off and dating another girl. And now that other girl that he was dating, he is now going to be marrying. Marcella is heartbroken because she has been holding a torch for him all this time. Now, when she starts going to some of the wedding festivities, she meets her best friend's brother, ex-NFL player Theo. Theo has a very similar issue to Marcella. He's actually in love with the woman his brother is married. There's lots of unrequited love because both Marcella and Theo are in love with one half of this couple that is about to be wed, and Theo and Marcella end up starting a fake dating, friends with benefits kind of fling that slowly blossoms into a romantic connection. This is a romance that I read very quickly. I particularly really loved Marcella's connection to books and to young adult books and her discussion of being a librarian. I think having worked in a library myself and getting my library studies degree, I've read fiction books and romance books in the past where people discuss libraries and working in libraries, and it never goes quite as in depth as I want it to. It doesn't always feel as grounded as this book did. So I liked the teen librarian representation in this book, even though that's not the kind of librarian that I'm going to be. And I really liked the fake dating between Theo and Marcella in theory. In practice, I think I never quite bought them as a couple, or like why they worked so well together. What was their puzzle piecey quality that made them a good fit? Besides her job as a librarian, I don't really remember very much about Marcella's narration. She did not have the kind of memorable personality that stuck out from some other main characters that I'll be discussing in this video. So overall, I liked this. I didn't love it. I wouldn't go out of my way to recommend it, but I also wouldn't not recommend it either. Just like a very middle of the road 3 stars. Another pretty middle of the road 3-star for me was My Friends by Frederik Backman. Now, if you know me and my reading taste, you know that Frederik Backman is one of my favorite authors ever. He wrote Anxious People, he wrote Beartown, both 5-star favorites for me. So a book of his being 3 stars is actually like quite disappointing. This book centers on a young girl named Louisa. She's an artist and she is in love with this very specific painting. It's a water scene with 3 figures on a dock at the very corner of the painting. Now, Louisa in the beginning of the book ends up meeting the artist of this painting and one of the subjects, one of the other 3 in the painting, and learns the story of how it came to be. We follow 2 different timelines: present day, where Louisa is learning about this painting, and then 25 years earlier when the artist and his childhood friends are having the summer that inspired this piece of artwork. This book did have the things that I come to expect and love from a Backman book. We've got very lovable characters, witty dialogue, emotional connections between the characters. However, I found it to be so boring. I feel like very little happens for this 435 page book. There was a lot that I felt could have been trimmed down because so often there were conversations where they weren't really talking about anything. The plot, if you could call it that, felt very meandering again. And in terms of preference, I just prefer things that get to the point a little bit more. So this was just a 3-star for me. Hello, had to take a quick break, but I'm back with our next book, which is Powerless, the Elsie Silver version, not the Lauren Roberts version that I read last year actually. But Powerless by Elsie Silver follows our main characters Jasper and Sloane. This is a like unrequited childhood crush, 2 friends, 2 lovers story. Sloane and Jasper met because Jasper was kind of adopted into the family of Sloane's cousins. Jasper lives with the Eaton family after he ends up being kicked out of his parents' home when he's in high school. And from there, they really treat him as a part of their family, but that's how Sloane meets him. Sloane has a huge crush on him. And it's not until later that they start to become friends and they start to develop feelings for one another. But at the beginning of this book, Sloane is about to be married to somebody else. She's about to be married to this like very uppity, hoity-toity kind of guy who had been set up with her by her father. I really loved this book through the first half of it. I thought that Sloane and Jasper's friendship was really convincing. I really liked their dynamic. I liked Sloane's gaining independence and slowly separating herself from her family and realizing how controlling and problematic her family was. However, as the book went on, and especially as we started getting more and more intimate scenes in the book, I do think that the sex scenes kind of ruined this book for me, not because I disliked what was happening, but rather because I disliked the context within which they were happening. I talked about this in my reading vlog for this book and another Elsie Silver book that I'll be talking about in a minute in my most recent reading vlog. But as the book went on, I didn't always feel that Sloane and Jasper were equally matched, especially because it's such a theme in Sloane's life that she's trying to like make decisions for herself and not be controlled by other people. And so the one area in which she's being controlled is in sex with Jasper. And so I ended up having a lot of complicated feelings about their relationship and about Jasper specifically. And I think I would have liked the book a lot more if the sex scenes were different. And thinking about that dynamic between them led me to think more and more about the way that their relationship developed and the way that Jasper kind of lets Sloane think for many years that he's not interested in her, even though he is attracted to her. There's a little bit of like, oh, I am keeping myself out of your life for your own good, like that kind of attitude. No details because no spoilers, obviously, but that is always a detail in books that really bothers me, that like I am going to make a decision without discussing with you for your own good. It really contributes again to this power imbalance between the two of them. I just never felt like they were on equal footing. So this, for as much as I loved the first half of the book and as much as I was apprehensive about the second half of the book and overall very apprehensive about Jasper in general, I gave this book 3 stars. Next is Left of Forever by Tarah DeWitt. This I gave 3.5 stars. It follows Ren and Ellis. They fell in love and started dating very young, like in high school. She gets pregnant right out of high school. Eventually the two of them get married, they have their child, and years later, when their child is in middle school, they get divorced. Flash forward to the present day, Ren and Ellis are helping their son Sam move out to college, and Ellis proposes that on the way back they take a little mini road trip together and talk about their relationship. Now during this road trip, as you can imagine, they do rekindle their romance and find their way back to one another. I thought this story was very sweet, very emotional. I particularly liked the way they talked about how Ren's body changed after she had her baby. I think that Ellis in particular really focused on this connection between them, like having a child together, and how that deepened their connection. And I also really thought that the reasons that they broke up, the reasons that they divorced, were pretty understandable. The main thing that kept this book from being a 4-star or higher was just a sense of repetitiveness throughout the story. It really felt like I was being told the same things about their relationship and about their dynamic over and over and over again. You know, in every romance book you read that the couple will end up together by the end, but in this one you knew so early on that the couple was going to be together in the end that a lot of it felt like fluff and filler. On a very different note, I read Don't Let the Forest In. I gave this 4 stars. This book follows Thomas and Andrew. They both go to a boarding school that abuts a very creepy forest, and one day some creepy creatures start coming out of this forest. They seem to look exactly like the monsters from the stories that Andrew writes and the illustrations that Thomas draws. I loved the writing style in this book. Really lush, really descriptive, but also quite fast-paced. I found it to be really spooky and immersive, and one that I will definitely be recommending moving into the fall. I did guess the ending, so I guess one negative could be be that it was a little bit predictable. And then the very end finishes out with a bit of an ambiguous note, which I guess could be a positive or a negative depending on how you feel about ambiguous endings. I think personally in this situation I would have preferred just a tad more explanation. So for me that's a negative, at least here. I mentioned that other Elsie Silver book that I read Wild Side, which I gave 4 stars. This book follows Tabby and Reese. Tabby finds out at the beginning of the book that her sister has passed away really tragically, and her sister Erica has left custody of her child not to Tabby, but to her landlord, Reese. Now, Tabby is really concerned with still being in her nephew Milo's life and trying to work with Reese so that they can both take care of this child. And the long story short is that Reese and Tabby end up in a marriage of convenience kind of fake relationship so that Reese can stay in the country. Tabby lives in Canada so that Reese does not have to take Milo back to the United States where he lives. I really like the dislike to love dynamic that Reese and Tabby have going on in this book. Their negative opinions of one another are really shaped by a lot of misinformation from Erica when she was alive. So watching them go from disliking each other so much to slowly getting to know one another to completely 180 changing their perceptions of one another was really satisfying. I really liked the main characters for the most part. I really loved the side characters. I think that enjoying the side characters so much in this book made me interested in going back and reading some of the previous books in this series, because I did start the series by reading the 3rd book. As far as negatives, I think Reese as a character really has that Elsie Silver man quality of being really possessive and aggressive, almost to an extreme sometimes, in a way that could be a little bit annoying to read. And it's played off as like being very romantic, but I found it a little bit cringy. Speaking of other cringy things, just the rapid rate at which their attraction blossomed even though they hated each other, and how extremely clear they made it to the reader all of the things that they would like to do to each other. It could, not always, but sometimes feel just a little bit immature. And then finally, I would have liked Milo to be just a little bit larger of a presence in this book. I didn't feel like he got really that much screen time, and considering the whole plot basically revolves around him, I would have liked to see more from him, particularly the fact that his mom just died and now he's being taken in by his aunt and his landlord. I didn't think that that was explored as much as maybe it could have been. Next is Queen of Shadows. This is book 4 in the Throne of Glass series. I almost said A Court of Thorns and Roses. Wrong series. This is the 4th book in the Throne of Glass series. This has been my favorite book in the series so far. No spoilers because this is quite far along in the series, but I felt like there were so many exciting developments in this book. I think my negative for this book in particular, and I guess for the series as a whole, is that sometimes I'm much more interested in certain character storylines than others. Particularly in this book, whenever Kale would show up, my eyes would glaze over, and I wish that every character in the book I could be equally invested in. Obviously that is a very difficult task to accomplish, but this one had a particularly exciting ending, which made me super excited to continue the next books, and I gave this 4 stars. Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, I also gave 4 stars. This book follows 3 characters on 3 different timelines. We follow one character in the 1500s, one in the 1800s, and then one in present day. And some of the characters in this book do become vampires. Their stories slowly interweave over the course of centuries. I liked how slowly and intricately the story built, and how complicated and flawed the characters were, and how some characters who I thought were relatively likable in the beginning ended up really descending into villainy by the end. I would call this a dark, twisted, sometimes love story, sometimes coming of age story, sometimes both. There is so much delicious drama. I think the thing that lost a star for this book for me was that it built so slowly and nicely, and then towards the end it suddenly started moving very fast, almost too fast, to the point that it was dissonant with the beginning of the book. I felt like as the plot started rolling faster and faster, more and more things were going unexplained, and I ended up being just a little bit underwhelmed by the ending. I did really like this, gave it 4 stars, but it was not without its negatives. Now on to the 5 stars that I had in June and July. I am so happy with the number of 5-star books that I read these months, starting with A Memoir in Order to Live. This book was written by a girl who escaped from North Korea with her mother. I feel like I learned so much from this book because it's really an area of the world, and North Korea, the history of North Korea, is really an area of history that I don't know very much about at all. This book was fast-paced and well written and really mesmerizing. These people go through such terrible things throughout this book, and every time you think that the worst thing has happened, somehow something worse happens in the very next chapter. So I guess if there is a reason not to read this book, it's that it is quite depressing. It's quite a downer, but you kind of know that going into the topic of this book. I also think that there were certain things that were left out of the story, probably for respect of the privacy of the other characters, the other people in the author's life, but I found myself being very, very, very curious about her sister, for example. But again, that's kind of a con that can't really be avoided. My next 5-star read, on a very, very, very different note, was Problematic Summer Romance by Hazelwood. This is one of my favorite romances I've read so far this year. Definitely a huge surprise for me because I did not expect to love an age gap romance so much. We follow Maya, who is 23, who ends up falling for Connor, who is her older brother's business partner and best friend, who is 38. The two of them had been very close friends until Connor decided to break off their friendship because they had feelings for one another, and he thought that it was inappropriate since he was so much older than her. And now in the present day, the two of them are interacting and seeing each other for the first time in a long time because Maya's brother slash Connor's business partner and best friend is getting married in a very fancy Italian destination wedding that they are both attending. My favorite thing about this book was Maya as a narrator. I thought she was so confident and fun and entertaining to read from the perspective of. I loved the Italian setting. I loved the quirky cast of side characters. My negatives, however, is that Connor could be so annoying. And I know it was such a large part of his character that he was full of self-loathing and he didn't want to allow himself to be in love. He didn't think he was like worthy of being in love, and that's valid. I get it. But the number of times that he turns Maya down throughout this book for no reason except he's older than her was really irritating, because it's so clear that this power imbalance that he is imagining is only really created by him. It's not just because of their ages, it's because of his actions. I also think the dual timelines in this book, the flashing back and forth, could sometimes be a little bit disorienting. Usually I love a dual timeline book, but I think in this case in particular, there were certain points where I got confused about the timeline because we were flashing back and forth so much. However, I think the tension in this book built so well, and Hazelwood did such a good job of convincing me that these two characters were meant to be together and that they were a really good match for each other, despite how much Connor irritated me. I read this book so fast, and I gave it 5 stars. Annie Bot, I have talked about a couple times on this channel. I loved it so much, read it for Summerween. We follow a robot named Annie who was supposed to be like a sex bot for her human owner Doug, but she's recently been turned autodidactic, which basically means that now she's artificially intelligent and she's becoming slowly more and more human over the course of the book. I loved that this book was really thought-provoking, full of really interesting metaphors about toxic relationships and emotionally abusive relationships, especially because of Annie's desperation to be what Doug needed, often at the expense of what she herself needed. It's short and very fast to read. I think if I had any negatives, it would be about the specifics of how Annie worked as a robot. I think sometimes the explanations were incomplete or a little bit confusing, and I found myself kind of second guessing why they would design her in certain ways because it didn't always make sense. Again, not to get into spoilers. That was a pretty small critique, I think, so overall, glowing 5 stars. And finally, I've talked about this many times again on my channel because this is my favorite book of the year, The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. We follow a world where a new ruler has to be chosen every 24 years. The new ruler is chosen from one of these factions based around an animal god, and that's just the tip of the iceberg on this very lush, beautiful, intricately drawn world. We primarily follow a character named Nima, who is a Raven scholar, and she is observing the trial that is going on to try to choose the next ruler. Someone is mysteriously and suddenly murdered, and Nima has to try to solve the mystery while also running into a lot of mysterious secrets that she didn't expect along the way. Besides Nima, this book has a large cast of really complicated, flawed, rich, interesting characters, and I loved reading about their development, some more than others. This book is incredibly immersive. I was completely drawn in, could not put it down. This is a very thick book, but I read it so quickly because I was completely glued to it, and every time I wasn't actively reading it, I was thinking about how I wished I was actively reading it. I also really loved the writing style. It's very unique. It's written from the perspective of the Raven God, and they actually are many ravens, all the ravens that have ever existed, and so they speak in the collective we and are speaking and narrating as though they're observing the events of the books. My one negative, if I have to choose a negative, which is tricky because again, I love this so much, my one negative is that there's an explanation towards the end of the book about an event in the beginning of the book that kind of felt dissonant. It did not feel like it completely explained that earlier event, and that left me feeling unsatisfied, at least about that part of the story. But overall, again, favorite book of the year, beautiful 5 stars. All right, that brings us to the end of the video, the end of all the reviews. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far in the video, if you made it to the end, comment a glitter emoji down below so that I know. I also would love to know if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts were. I think it would be very fun to discuss them with you in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe and click the bell if you have not already so that you can be notified of the next time I post a video. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you next time.